Jessica Carpenter had never missed a shift. She was reliable. That's how her manager at Red Lobster in Aiken, South Carolina, described her. On time, polite, steady. She wasn't the kind of kid who flaked out or vanished without a call. So when Jessica didn't show up for work on the afternoon of August 4th, 2000, no one assumed the worst. Not yet. The first call went to voicemail. The second rang out. The third bounced straight to silence. By the time her mother, Judy Carpenter, walked through the front door of their home on Croft Avenue later that day, the signs were already there. Jessica's lunch sat untouched on the counter. The stereo was still playing softly in her bedroom. Her purse was in the kitchen. Her cell phone was on her bed. The dog Bella was agitated, circling the hallway, barking at nothing. And Jessica was nowhere. Crossland Park wasn't a high-crime area. It was middle America in every way. Quiet streets, modest single-family homes, and neighbors who waved at each other on the way to work. But behind Jessica's bedroom door, the illusion of safety had already been shattered. When officers arrived on scene minutes later, they followed standard protocol. There was no forced entry, no broken windows, no alarm triggered. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the house was orderly, almost sterile. No obvious struggle, no blood visible to the untrained eye. But in Jessica's bedroom, the forensic picture told a different story. Her body was found partially clothed, lying on the floor between the dresser and the closet door. There were ligature marks on her neck and abrasions on her wrists. The coroner would later note signs of sexual assault. The time of death was estimated to be between 11:30 a.m. and 1 p.m., hours before Judy returned home. The first responder on scene recalled later, "It looked staged, like someone wanted us to think she hadn't resisted, but the details didn't line up." Crime scene technicians began processing the house immediately. They found trace amounts of semen on the carpet near the victim's legs. A partial shoe print, size 10 or 11, was lifted from the laminate just outside the bedroom door. There were fingerprints on the doorknob that didn't match anyone in the Carpenter family. A faint fiber, gray polyester, was recovered from under Jessica's fingernails. Most notably, the front door lock showed no signs of tampering, which meant either the killer had a key or Jessica had let him in. That narrowed the possibilities fast. Judy Carpenter was the first to be questioned. She told officers her daughter had stayed home alone that morning while she worked the early shift. No friends were scheduled to visit. Jessica had planned to do laundry and meet her coworker at Red Lobster around 3 p.m. She never made it. The family's dog hadn't been kenneled, which was unusual. Bella was protective. Officers theorized that either Jessica was too comfortable to restrain her, or that the person who entered wasn't seen as a threat. By nightfall, detectives had roped off the entire property and begun canvassing neighbors. One reported seeing a white van parked across the street around noon. Another claimed to hear a loud thump around 12:15 p.m., but dismissed it as moving furniture. None of the sightings led to a clear suspect. No license plate, no surveillance footage. Crossland Park didn't have cameras. It didn't need them. Until now. In the days that followed, investigators pulled call logs, collected DNA samples from known associates, and cross-checked Jessica's communications for any unusual activity. Nothing suspicious surfaced. Her phone records showed no unfamiliar numbers. Her computer, rudimentary at best, contained school files, music, and a few saved chats with classmates. No threats, no red flags. For a while, the working theory was random home invasion, but the lack of forced entry made that increasingly unlikely. The profile didn't fit. Jessica wasn't involved in drugs. She wasn't dating. She had no history of mental illness, no enemies. She was, in every traditional sense of the word, safe. But someone had walked through her front door. Someone who didn't belong. By 9 p.m. on August 4th, the house at 323 Croft Avenue was a sealed crime scene. Yellow tape bordered the perimeter. A mobile forensics unit arrived with technicians from the Aiken County Sheriff's Office. No media had arrived yet. The street remained eerily quiet, except for the low murmur of latex gloves snapping and camera shutters clicking in the dark. The first forensic sweep focused on the victim's bedroom. The scene was isolated, with no visible blood or weapon present. A single overhead light illuminated the layout. Nothing had been stolen. The drawers were closed. Jewelry was untouched. The body placement was deliberate, posed almost, but not in any ritualistic sense. There was no signature, no message left behind. Jessica's injuries were specific. Manual strangulation with signs of sustained force, likely lasting 30 seconds or more. Petechiae around the eyes, abrasions on the inner arm, defensive wounds minimal. No ligature was found on site. The cause of death would later be confirmed by the coroner: asphyxiation due to manual strangulation, with secondary trauma consistent with sexual assault. The killer hadn't rushed. Evidence markers began populating the carpet. Marker 3, a partial print on the inside doorframe, index and middle fingers only. Marker 7, a single light-colored fiber on the carpet near Jessica's foot. Marker 11, a semen sample recovered from beneath the body, not immediately visible without UV. A crime scene tech lifted it using sterile gauze and sealed it for expedited DNA processing. Anomaly. The lock on the front door was undamaged. No pry marks, no signs of forced entry. The deadbolt was disengaged. That detail would prove critical. Another anomaly. The bathroom faucet in the hallway had been run recently. Water residue was still present in the sink basin, but there were no wet towels and no prints on the faucet knobs. The killer may have attempted to clean up. If so, it was rushed or partial. A latent footprint was developed outside the bedroom using chemical reagent and lifted with gel film. Size: men's 10.5 athletic sole. Right foot only, pressure light on the heel. It suggested the subject had moved cautiously, perhaps backward or while turning. The digital forensic team arrived shortly after midnight. They retrieved Jessica's cell phone first, an older Nokia model with limited memory. No new text that day. Last outgoing call, 10:42 a.m., to her mother, unanswered. The phone had remained stationary in the bedroom all afternoon. A basic PC sat on her desk. Standard OS, no password protection. Search history showed nothing recent. The last website visited was her high school's band schedule. There were no signs of chat rooms, no emails from unknown accounts, no interaction with strangers. A clean slate. The router logs were less clear. Her home Wi-Fi had been active at 12:18 p.m. No incoming connections, no unusual IP traffic. Still, the digital trail, like the physical one, ended at the bedroom. For now, there was no point of entry, no clear suspect, no digital footprint, no criminal signature. Everything suggested control, timing, execution, exit. It didn't look improvised. It looked planned. Detectives began internal interviews before dawn. Judy Carpenter was questioned again. She left the house around 7:45 a.m. Jessica had been folding laundry. The front door had been locked. Jessica had no boyfriend, no parties, no secrets. She didn't drink. She didn't use drugs. Her social circle was limited to school, work, and family. Forensics cross-checked fingerprints found in the home. Most belonged to Jessica, Judy, or common visitors. One unknown partial remained, a clean right index with a lateral swipe pattern on the doorframe. It was run through AFIS, no matches. By day 2, investigators had taken DNA from all known contacts: co-workers, schoolmates, neighbors, ex-employees from Red Lobster. Over 60 voluntary swabs were collected. None returned a match to the semen sample. Still, the profile was complete. Male, non-smoker. No sign of drug metabolites, no genetic anomalies. The lab classified the DNA as suitable for direct identification. At this point, the case lacked motive, suspect, or narrative. But the inconsistencies began to surface. The way the body was placed without signs of a fight, the way the killer walked in, confidently, silently, and left no trace on the digital side. It felt like someone with practice, or someone who knew the layout. One of the lead detectives noted privately in the case log, "This doesn't feel like a thrill kill. This feels like someone who used familiarity as a weapon." Another wrote, "The data aligns too well. That's not normal. Real cases are messy. This one's too clean." There was no media release yet. The family requested silence. But internally, the case had been prioritized as a Category A homicide. That meant every detail would be logged, processed, and re-reviewed. This wasn't going cold, not yet. 3 days into the investigation, the case was officially classified as high priority. Not just because of the victim's age or the brutality of the crime, but because nothing about it fit the usual mold. No forced entry, no clear motive, no traceable contact between the victim and any known predator. Yet the killer had moved with precision, knew the layout, and left minimal evidence. That narrowed the possibilities without pointing to anyone specific. Detectives began reconstructing Jessica Carpenter's final day in granular detail. They pulled shift logs from Red Lobster, checking for any employee disputes, customer complaints, or strangers who had taken an unusual interest in her. They found none. Jessica had worked the closing shift on August 3rd. Her manager confirmed she left just after 10 p.m., walked to her mother's car, and drove straight home. That was her last confirmed movement in public. The search then widened to those who might have encountered her at home. Every recent delivery was accounted for. Groceries, internet maintenance, HVAC repair. All contacts were cleared, except for one, a package delivered 2 days before the murder. According to the label, it was signed for by Jessica. The package itself was unremarkable. Replacement parts for a small kitchen appliance. But the delivery person wasn't from a major carrier. It had been subcontracted to a third-party courier. The dispatch system only listed a route ID, no name. That missing detail raised the first real concern in the investigation. A canvass of the neighborhood began again, this time focusing specifically on deliveries, visitors, or utility workers who had appeared in the days before the murder. One neighbor, a retiree who lived across the street, remembered seeing a white delivery van parked for several minutes around noon on August 2nd. She didn't recall the exact time, but noted that the driver didn't appear in uniform. No company name on the van, no interaction with others on the street. Another resident, 2 houses down, reported a slight disturbance on the morning of August 4th, around 12:15 p.m. A loud bang, something dropping. At the time, it seemed like nothing. Moving furniture, perhaps. But it now lined up with Jessica's estimated time of death. When pieced together, the statements pointed toward a narrow window. The subject had likely entered between 11:30 a.m. and 12:15 p.m. and exited before 1 p.m. without alerting anyone. No tire tracks were recovered. The lawn was dry. Security footage was non-existent. Crossland Park was residential, not commercial. Cameras weren't the norm. The police began investigating logistics companies operating in the region, specifically those using temporary drivers. Airborne Express, UPS, FedEx, DHL, and smaller subcontracted outfits were contacted. Most had electronic logs for dispatch, GPS data, and uniform requirements. Still, delays in retrieving records meant this line of inquiry would take time. Meanwhile, the DNA evidence, collected from the carpet and processed by the SLED lab, was entered into CODIS. The result came back. No match, not in any known offender database. The profile was solid, but it didn't belong to anyone flagged in law enforcement systems. What it did indicate, however, was that the assailant was likely not a first-time offender. The level of caution, the removal of certain trace elements, the clean digital footprint, those were learned behaviors. But if this wasn't his first crime, then where were the other victims? Why hadn't he surfaced before? Investigators began quietly reviewing unsolved sexual assaults and homicides from surrounding counties with similar victim profiles and forensic markers. The goal was simple: determine if this was part of a larger pattern. The search was wide but unproductive, until a cold case file from Georgia flagged a potential correlation. 2 years earlier, in 1998, a 19-year-old woman was found strangled in her home in Augusta, roughly 20 miles from Aiken. Her case, too, involved no forced entry, partial cleanup, and a single male DNA sample left behind. The sample had never been identified. When compared side by side, the case shared at least 6 forensic parallels with Jessica's. Most notably, manual strangulation, delayed discovery, and the suspect's control over the crime scene environment. Still, DNA comparison results were pending. Until then, the connection was only circumstantial. But for investigators, it was the first meaningful lead that suggested the murder of Jessica Carpenter might not have been random. Internally, the case briefing notes reflected a shift in tone. It was no longer being treated solely as a local homicide. Now, the possibility of a mobile offender, someone with job flexibility, possibly in delivery or maintenance, capable of moving between cities unnoticed, was firmly on the table. Still, the case lacked a face. No match to Prince, no link to Jessica, no suspects under surveillance. Just a narrowing framework. A man who used familiarity as access, silence as camouflage, and time windows under 1 hour to commit acts of complete violence, then vanish. In towns like Aiken, crimes like this didn't just raise alarms. They destabilized the very idea of safety. On the fourth day of the investigation, a logistics error revealed a critical gap. The delivery made to the Carpenter residence 2 days before Jessica's murder, originally logged as routine, had no traceable driver assigned in the dispatch records. The package was processed, the drop time confirmed, but the entry under delivered by was blank. It wasn't just a clerical oversight. When investigators contacted the regional office responsible for the subcontracted route, they learned that Airborne Express had outsourced that leg of delivery to a temp agency. The agency, in turn, had hired freelance drivers on short-term, high-volume contracts with minimal vetting. No uniform requirement, no GPS logging on personal vehicles, no identity verification beyond a driver's license and a signature on paper forms. That subcontractor had since ceased operations. The trail began to evaporate before it even started. Investigators obtained archived route sheets for the week leading up to August 4th. The sheets listed only package counts and rough drop-off times, not names, not vehicle IDs. One field labeled Courier ID was filled with hand-scribbled initials, RA. It wasn't enough for confirmation, but it was enough for concern. Detectives worked with the state labor office to access contractor records tied to the temp agency. Dozens of short-term hires were listed. Most had moved on. Many couldn't be located. Some provided only P.O. boxes or burner phone numbers. The initials RA appeared next to a contract filed under a 1-month route assignment in Aiken County. The application file was missing a social security number. The background check section was blank. This was not just sloppy oversight, it was systemic negligence. As the team expanded their search, they cross-checked route logs with other neighborhoods near Crossland Park. A pattern began to surface, not in the crimes but in the gaps. 4 other delivery points listed the same courier initials over a 2-week period, each time without confirmation of arrival. In 2 of those cases, residents later reported missing parcels that had never been officially recovered. What linked them wasn't the theft. It was the same pattern of incomplete paperwork, non-uniform drop-offs, and silent disappearances. In one case, a teenage girl had reported a man watching her from a delivery van outside her home. The report was filed but never pursued. None of this proved criminal intent, but it showed consistency in access. Someone with logistical coverage, anonymity, and familiarity with suburban layouts. The team returned to Jessica's neighborhood to reassess routes and entry angles. They timed various approach paths, tested visibility from surrounding houses, and confirmed how long a vehicle could idle unnoticed in midday hours. With doors unlocked, dogs indoors, and mail routinely dropped off by unfamiliar faces, access could be exploited in seconds. Back at the crime lab, another layer of forensic evidence came in. The polyester fiber recovered under Jessica's fingernail was confirmed to be synthetic uniform fabric. Color match medium gray, composition 60% polyester, 40% rayon. This blend was common in corporate logistics apparel, but also widely used in inexpensive workwear sold through retail chains. The partial fingerprint lifted from the bedroom door frame remained unmatched in AFIS, but the ridge pattern and loop shape were consistent across several smudge prints later found on the hallway light switch and one drawer handle. Someone had moved inside the home with relative comfort, enough to turn off lights and close drawers without urgency. At this stage, the investigative focus shifted toward access-based offenders, individuals who gained proximity to victims through employment, contractual roles, or community-facing tasks. The Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, was contacted for a preliminary profile. Their early report emphasized the offender's restraint, controlled entry and exit, no overkill, no physical ransacking. Evidence selectively erased, not randomly destroyed. This pointed away from impulsive violence. It leaned toward opportunistic targeting, driven by availability, not emotion. The theory: the victim was not known personally, but chosen situationally. Investigators knew this wasn't the kind of crime that left dramatic clues behind, but it was the kind that unraveled quietly, with minor gaps in corporate records, a smudge on a doorknob, a driver hired for convenience instead of accountability. In rural communities, trust fills the space where surveillance does not. Packages get left on porches, names aren't always checked, and unmarked vans are part of daily life. What this case was beginning to show wasn't just a homicide, it was a system failure, a hole wide enough for a predator to slip through without being seen, logged, or stopped. By mid-September 2002, the Aiken County Sheriff's Office had reached a threshold. The case had passed every internal escalation point. A regional task force was assisting. The FBI had reviewed preliminary behavioral data. But without a name, R.A. remained a ghost, visible only through incomplete forms and circumstantial presence. He had existed on paper, but not in systems, not in surveillance, not in fingerprint databases. Investigators pivoted to DMV data. The reasoning was methodical. If the courier had a valid driver's license registered in South Carolina or Georgia and had used it during onboarding, there should be at least a digital trail. The temp agency provided a copy of the original application packet. The driver's name field had been handwritten, partially legible. Robert A., the rest scrawled. A copy of a South Carolina license was included, but the image was blurry, ink faded. The laminate reflected light badly. No digital scan existed. Still, one visible number stood out, the first four digits of a license number matching a format issued by the DMV in late 1999. A request was made to retrieve the full license record from backup microfilm. The license, when finally pulled, belonged to Robert Franklin Atkins, born 1973, last known address in Edgefield County, less than 30 minutes from Aiken. He had no active warrants, no criminal convictions. A misdemeanor theft charge in 1996 had been dropped. No violent priors, no formal complaints, no sex offender registry entry. What stood out wasn't what was on the record, it was what wasn't. No stable employment history, no credit lines, no utility bills in his name, no digital presence, no email, social media, or online banking. For a man in his late 20s, this absence wasn't just outdated, it was engineered. Detectives acquired a court order to obtain a buccal swab from Atkins. At the time, he was being held in a county facility on an unrelated charge, second-degree burglary. He'd been caught stealing electronics from a pawn shop warehouse. No resistance, no weapon, just a quiet arrest 2 counties away. The DNA results came back in 8 business days. 100% match. The semen collected from the carpet beneath Jessica Carpenter's body, sample 11 sealed at 9:17 p.m. on August 4, 2000, matched the buccal swab from Robert Franklin Atkins with complete profile alignment. Not partial, not familial, direct. That was the break. Not a confession, not a tip, just a cold entry in a backup form, the sliver of a license number, and a long-delayed coincidence in a jail holding cell. 2 years after the murder, the case had a suspect with a name, a face, and now an anchor. Interrogation began under formal Miranda protocols. Atkins denied knowing Jessica, denied ever entering her home, denied being in Aiken on August 4th. His demeanor was flat, measured, emotionless. When confronted with the DNA results, he paused, then asked for an attorney. He never spoke another word to law enforcement. A search warrant was executed on his prior residence. The home had been vacated months earlier. Still, inside the garage, investigators recovered gray work pants matching the fiber composition found under Jessica's fingernail. The pants carried faint traces of biological material. Not enough for a full DNA profile, but consistent with trace elements found in the victim's room. They also found a stack of unused delivery labels and an airborne express route manual from 2000. Atkins had never returned his uniform or paperwork. In forensic terms, this was conclusive. In procedural terms, it was admissible. The district attorney's office began pre-indictment prep. Charges were drafted: first-degree murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, and felony burglary. Jessica Carpenter's family was notified. For the first time in over 2 years, her mother sat across from the lead detective and was told, in plain terms, "We have him." The case shifted from pursuit to prosecution. This was the moment when many true crime stories pivot to closure. But in this one, closure didn't come with the arrest, because the profile never matched the man. Robert Franklin Atkins had no public signs of escalation, no reputation for violence, no connections to the victim, no known mental illness, no ideology. He wasn't following anyone. He wasn't targeting multiple victims, at least not as far as the system could prove, and that unsettled investigators more than anything. Robert Franklin Atkins existed on paper, but paper doesn't always show the full truth. After his identification, investigators started pulling every possible record on him. The results were unsettling, not for what they revealed, but for how little they said. No stable employment beyond temporary manual labor, no credit activity, no tax returns filed after 1999, no verifiable phone number for the past year. A man living within a community, but outside its systems. He had no wife, no children, no listed next of kin. When detectives contacted prior landlords, they described him as quiet, punctual with rent, mostly kept to himself. One mentioned a television and mattress in the living room. Nothing else. No photos, no decorations, no evidence of hobbies, visitors, or social interaction. Neighbors in the last two addresses couldn't recall ever speaking to him directly. There was no trace of a digital life. The Behavioral Analysis Unit delivered their full profile 10 days after the DNA match. It was built from the limited crime scene evidence, Jessica's case, and a cross-reference to the 1998 Augusta homicide with similar characteristics, now reclassified as possibly connected. The profile described a subject with above-average impulse control, low interpersonal engagement, and the capacity to suppress outward signs of stress after committing violent acts. The absence of a criminal escalation curve stood out. Typically, offenders who rape and kill at that level of control do not stop, or if they do, it's because of incarceration, geographic relocation, or death. But Atkins had simply vanished from record after 2000, until the pawnshop burglary. That incident, now viewed through the lens of a solved murder, didn't align. Breaking into a storage facility for low-value electronics? No force used, no violence, no resistance. It read like a financial decision, not a compulsive one. Investigators believed it might have been circumstantial, a rare misstep, or just bad luck. But even that theft may have saved the case. Interviews with jail staff, public defenders, and prior employers added little. Most described Atkins as compliant, unemotional, forgettable. He showed no signs of instability, no aggressive behavior, no grandiosity. When asked how he spent his time in jail, guards reported that he mostly read. When asked what he read, no one could recall. It became clear that profiling this suspect was not about identifying patterns. It was about understanding the absence of them. From a forensic standpoint, the prosecution had a complete package. DNA match. Trace fiber consistent with uniform pants found at his former residence. A confirmed work history on the delivery route leading directly to Jessica Carpenter's home. No alibi. A lack of forced entry. No known relationship. Access through employment. The timeline aligned. The method matched a prior unsolved case. There were no alternate suspects remaining. But one critical question persisted. Why? There was no confession, no letter, no journal, no manifesto. Nothing left behind that explained motive, intent, or remorse. Atkins refused further cooperation. His attorney advised him to remain silent throughout the pretrial phase. That silence weighed heavily, not just on investigators, but on the Carpenter family. Because absence is harder to rationalize than evil. A motive can be hated, dissected, processed. But the void, committing a brutal murder without reason, connection, or history, makes the event feel random, unstoppable, like it could happen again, with no warning. That's what unsettled the Aiken County team most. In late October, Atkins was formally indicted on all charges. Court documents were filed under seal until arraignment. The case would not be televised, no plea deal was offered. The DA's office moved swiftly to push for a bench trial. The forensic report was over 200 pages long, including all exhibits: fiber microscopy, genetic sequencing, fingerprint grid overlays, entry logs from the temp agency, and digitally enhanced delivery route mapping. Every detail was vetted for admissibility. Prosecutors did not want this case reopened on appeal. There would be no room for procedural error. One final task remained before trial prep: reaching out to other jurisdictions. The 1998 Augusta murder now carried stronger implications. GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, submitted the cold case DNA for expedited comparison. The match came back days before Thanksgiving, confirming that Robert Franklin Atkins was the donor in both cases. Two confirmed murders, 4 years apart, same method, same forensic pattern, but no criminal record in between. No arrest, no missed court date, no flagged behavior. That led to a chilling realization among investigators. This wasn't a killer who got lucky. This was a man who understood systems well enough to disappear inside them. He didn't leave trails because he never made noise. He never approached his victims through social interaction. He didn't threaten. He didn't stalk. He didn't confess. He just knocked, walked in, and left. By March 2003, the prosecution of Robert Franklin Atkins had entered formal motion hearings. The trial would proceed without a confession, without a clear motive, and without any statement from the defendant. But what it always had, was evidence. Physical, traceable, and verified by protocol. The first challenge came from the defense: a motion to suppress the DNA collected during Atkins's detention on the burglary charge. They argued that the sample was taken under duress, unrelated to the murder investigation, and therefore inadmissible. The judge disagreed. The court ruled that the buccal swab was obtained through proper procedure, under lawful detainment, and with a signed consent form. There was no coercion, no deviation from process. The evidence stood. This became the defining feature of the pretrial phase: an attack on process, not facts. The prosecution leaned heavily into sequence and forensic integrity. They built a case that wasn't dependent on narrative, but on accumulation. Each item, each match, each timestamp was presented not to tell a story, but to reinforce a chain of custody. Item 1, the DNA recovered from the carpet beneath Jessica Carpenter. Sealed, logged, and stored correctly, chain unbroken. Item 2, the synthetic fiber recovered from under Jessica's fingernail. Microscopically consistent with the pants recovered from Atkins' residence. Color matched, composition matched. Item 3, delivery logs placing Atkins on the route that included the Carpenter residence 2 days before the murder. Item 4, fingerprint smudges found on the bedroom door frame in hallway light switch. While partial and not AFIS matched, the orientation and spacing aligned with the height and dominant hand of the defendant. Item 5, no alibi, no witnesses placing Atkins elsewhere during the time of the murder. All of it admissible, all of it presented with verified lab reports and testimony from forensic experts. The defense, lacking exculpatory evidence, focused on the absence of direct eyewitnesses and the lack of a confession. They pushed hard on the theory of contamination. Could the DNA have been transferred inadvertently? Was the fiber too common to be definitive? Did the lack of video or audio recordings weaken the foundation of guilt? The prosecution countered with forensic standards. Crime lab protocol was explained in detail for the jury: the handling of biological samples, the safeguards against contamination, the frequency of independent audits. It wasn't entertainment, it wasn't drama, but it was unshakable. The DA's team never framed this case as an emotional tragedy. They framed it as a solved equation. The Carpenter family sat through every proceeding. Jessica's mother didn't speak to the press. Her father declined interviews. They weren't looking for closure. They were looking for accountability. What defined this case was not a trial filled with courtroom theatrics. It was the absence of noise. No grand speeches, no shouting matches. Just page after page of documentation, testimony from those who handled the case, and a slow, methodical confirmation of guilt. Every element was connected, not by motive, but by presence. Toward the end of the evidentiary phase, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation submitted their findings. The 1998 Augusta homicide was a forensic match. Same DNA, same method of operation. The woman killed in that case had also been alone, in her home, in the early afternoon. That evidence was not introduced at trial. It wasn't needed, but it was recorded. The prosecution closed by underscoring what the jury already understood. The defendant's DNA was at the scene. The defendant had access to the house. The timeline aligned. No one else did. And that was the message. In towns like Aiken, justice doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with records, files, sworn statements. And when the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, there was no outburst in the courtroom, just silence. Because in this case, silence was all Atkins ever gave them. Robert Franklin Atkins was sentenced in 2006. 2 consecutive life sentences. No parole, no eligibility for appeal, no further investigation required. The official case file for the murder of Jessica Carpenter was marked closed, resolved by arrest. In procedural terms, the story ended there. But in real life, it didn't. In the months following the verdict, Aiken County held no press conference. There was no public statement from the DA, no televised walkout from the courtroom. The Carpenter family exited the back of the courthouse quietly. A single photo captured Judy Carpenter holding a folded piece of paper, a copy of the judgment. What followed wasn't closure, it was adjustment. Jessica's room remained untouched for over a year. Her saxophone stayed in its case. The scholarship fund established in her name was first awarded in the spring of 2004. It went to a high school senior who, like Jessica, played in the school band. The award amount was modest, the symbolism wasn't. Aiken High School renamed a practice room in her memory. No ceremony, just a plaque. From a legal standpoint, the case was a textbook victory in evidence-based prosecution. No confession, no motive, no eyewitness. Just a closed-loop forensic build, from DNA to fibers to timeline. The trial became a reference point for state training seminars on handling no-confession homicides. It wasn't celebrated, it was studied. In response to the gaps exploited in this case, several regional courier companies began implementing standardized background checks in late 2003. Airborne Express, by then in merger with DHL, revised its subcontractor policies. The changes were internal. There was no public admission of failure. The temp agency that originally hired Atkins no longer existed. Jessica Carpenter's story didn't become a national headline. There was no Netflix series, no best-selling book. Her name didn't circulate in media cycles beyond a few crime forums and local retrospectives. But within her community, and within the state's investigative circles, the case carried weight. It became a quiet reminder of what happens when a person blends into the systems designed to protect us. When a name isn't flagged, when a background check isn't done, when access is given without oversight. What happened to Jessica wasn't a statistical anomaly. It was the result of procedural absence. In 2008, a magnolia tree was planted in Crosland Park near the community center. It wasn't a dedication ceremony, no news crew, no ribbon, just a tree, planted by city workers with a small sign. In memory of Jessica Lynn Carpenter, 1983 to 2000. That tree still stands today. It doesn't tell the full story, but it's there, quiet, permanent, like the case itself. Justice doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes in silence, in records, in the steady work of people who refuse to stop asking hard questions. Jessica Carpenter's case reminded me that we can't afford to ignore the gaps in our systems, because someone always finds a way to slip through them. If you're watching this, maybe you're a parent, a student, or someone who's seen firsthand what happens when safety is taken for granted. So I'll leave you with this. What does safe really mean if it relies on trust without accountability? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, I still want to hear your take. Your voice matters here. If you found this video powerful or thought-provoking, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next case we uncover together.